Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the Glad Trad podcast. I'm Jordan Pacheco. Hope you're doing well and happy Feast of the Assumption, most blessed day where, or the Dormition, I suppose, if you're Eastern Catholic, right? But where Our Lady, the Blessed Virgin Mary, was assumed body and soul into heaven to be seated at the right hand of our Lord Jesus Christ and to become Queen of the angels. So do yourselves a favor. Remember, it's a holy day of obligation. So if you weren't planning on going to Mass, now you have no excuse. So definitely try to get to Mass today and definitely participate in the great joys that are happening, not just here on earth, but in heaven. But I wanted to tell just a very quick story from Mass this morning because it very much reinforced the truths of our faith. So I usher sometimes at the Latin Mass that I go to, and today was no exception. They were asking for volunteers. And so for us here at my parish, what ushers do as well as they double up as what's called Eucharistic guardians. So you do all your typical usher duties, right? The baskets, all that kind of jazz, making sure people can get to a seat. And then we put on white gloves and we also have a white cloth in our pocket. And you stand to the side of the altar rail while the faithful are receiving communion and the priest and the server, right, are coming up and down to the paten. And you're just making sure that if the host falls, that you can kind of get to it fast to cover it to make sure nothing happens. Or, God forbid, if somebody tries to take a host, that you can step in and just sort of be that barrier. It's a very a great honor, and I very much enjoyed my time being an usher. Well, for whatever reason today, the second priest comes out to service the other side of the altar rail, and the server who's been throughout Mass, there were two of them, now there's just one. So what will also happen as a Eucharistic guardian is that you might be asked to step in and hold the paten and, kind of fulfill the role of the server. So that happened to me today, and I was an altar boy, of course, growing up, but I'd never held a paten before. And I didn't recognize that until today. I was a cross bearer growing up, and I was very happy about that. But at the parish where I was when I was a boy, there weren't patens, and there was no altar rail, of course. And I don't think I really saw that much communion on the tongue, only a couple of times from very particular people. So that was even very foreign to me. So there's something that happened that very much moved me. And as you're holding the paten and you're making sure that the host doesn't fall or that particles don't fall, even at a very reverent, very beautiful traditional Latin Mass like the one I attended and attend, particles of our Lord will still find themselves on the paten. This is amazing. Twice during, as we're going up and down, making sure everyone gets communion, the priest kind of would get his hand over and would scoop the additional particles that were on the paten back into the ciborium. And again, these aren't very big particles, right? They're not halves of hosts or something, but they're noticeable to the human eye. And that moved me very deeply because, with a lot of us, especially with this year of Eucharistic revival, there is a question about reverence for our Lord. And are we actually treating the Eucharist as the source and summit of the Christian life? Are we actually treating it as the body, blood, soul, and divinity of our Lord? For most of my life, I would still probably have another 18 years to break even. I've received communion in my hand. Now, when I was in first communion back in first grade, we were taught that you're making a throne for Jesus. I would say that we were taught in a very reverent way, not to chew the host like it's a hamburger or plain food, but trying to have some reverence still. But nonetheless, I still was taught to receive in my hand. I didn't know that there was any other way to receive our Lord back then. And I would see occasionally as a boy growing up, people would come to our parish and they would receive our Lord, not just on the tongue, but sometimes kneeling and on their tongue. And I thought that was weird. Like, that's extra. It's probably what I would have thought. That's just a little much, right? All these people are holier than thou Catholics. And even though I would say that I was taught to have a reverence for our Lord in the Eucharist, I didn't unlock for myself the depths of what it actually means for our Lord to be there present, body, blood, soul, and divinity, until I started receiving on the tongue, which I believe for me happened in either very late high school or in college. So again, still a lot of time to sort of break even on the habit. And that very much moved me today at Mass. And at one point, even our priest dropped one of the hosts. And also, first off, can I just do a great PSA? Guys, you have to open your mouths for the priest. It is amazing to be on the other side of the altar rail and to see how confusing it can be if some people don't kind of open their mouth and stick out their tongue until the very last moment. How the priest is going to make sure that the host gets into your mouth. So open your mouth, stick out your tongue, and make sure to do that before the priest arrives. So at least you can communicate to him and to the server that you are receiving communion that day. Also, make sure there's some space in between your chin and maybe the rest of your body so that the paten can fit underneath. I learned a lot today, man. It was crazy. I hope that there's some altar server training that talks about this. But being on the other side, I was just so deeply moved by the fact that even here at a Latin Mass, particles of our Lord still find themselves onto the paten. I had heard this before, but I just never really seen it. And at one point, even a whole host dropped onto the paten, dropped from somebody's tongue. And the priest was able to retrieve it, of course, because the paten was right there, and put it back in the person's mouth, and it was totally fine. But very deeply moving me. And today on the Assumption, I just have such a renewed reverence for the Eucharist. Such a beautiful thing. The fact that our Lord gives us his body and gives us his blood. What does he say? But my flesh is true food and my blood is true drink. And both of the species are present in one single species of the Eucharist, right? So body and blood are present if you just take the host as you would at the Latin Mass. I've had a lot of times this year, friends, where I'll be honest, I've not either been disposed or I've not been in a state of grace, sometimes for weeks on end, to where I've not been able to receive our Lord. And to be able not just to receive him today, but to be able to see the great beauty and importance it is to cherish the Eucharist has really deeply moved me. So I want to make this short video, and I just wanted to say a couple of things. First, if you're at a parish that is obviously a Novus Ordo, and maybe you've been motivated, as my father has talked about, my own dad, if you've been motivated to receive on your tongue, you want this instilled, you have this instilled reverence for the Eucharist, but maybe you'd feel like you're the only one in your parish. Are you shy about it, nervous, self-conscious? This is your great call and your great reminder that it's courage and it's faith that moves us to heaven. Receive on your tongue. Kneel down if you can, but certainly receive on your tongue. The amount of reverence between communion in the hand and communion on the tongue is an ocean for me, especially today. And I believed the truths of the faith when I was receiving in my hand. I believed everything I believe now, but it's just deeper. And the reason why is because to receive kneeling and on the tongue really makes a distinction that the Eucharist is set apart from ordinary food. These hands are about to touch some Cinnabon in just a little bit, right? But there are no hand holding, there's no grasping our Lord, but is instead patiently and passively receiving the great gift of the Eucharist. And so the communion in the hand was supposed to just be an indult, an experiment. We're done siding with the worst of the reformers, right? This experiment has obviously led to a lack of belief in the real presence because the Eucharist has just become ordinary food. And if you go to other rites, say if you go to a Byzantine divine liturgy, they don't have that, right? They have the bread, leavened bread, dipped in the blood of Christ and delivered to you on a spoon, and they have an altar cloth or a cloth. I don't know what they exactly call it. It looks like an altar cloth if you attend the Church of Latin Mass, but they have that spread instead of a paten, and you just understand how much deeper their sister rites when you see the reverence for our Lord. So if you've been really on the fence, I want to receive on the tongue. I feel like that's my call. I want to respect our Lord all the more. This is your call to do so. And then second is that if you haven't already, if you're at a parish that doesn't have kneelers, doesn't have an altar rail, doesn't have patens, talk to your priest, strategize. If you have children, perhaps it's time to get them involved in serving. A lot of priests coming out these days, Novus Ordo priests, are obviously leaning towards tradition. They love the authentic witness of the faith. And that's why this year of Eucharistic Revival, the things that moved me the deepest was seeing priests of the Novus Ordo actually make sure that there was a kneeler at least, and to really emphasize receiving communion on the tongue and kneeling if possible for the faithful. Just an absolutely beautiful thing. There are some of you I know in the audience who are very, very sensitive about communion in the hand, that pray acts of reparation. I do this when I attend the new mass and I see communion on the hand, and I say to God, it's not a neglect, a deliberate neglect that people do this. I think it's because they just don't know. Because I didn't know. That's part of my story, right? I didn't know until I got later into life. I was already almost a young man by the time I realized just how serious to receive on the tongue is. So I always say a prayer for an act of reparation, because even looking at those particles of our Lord on the paten made me realize how many every day, perhaps millions of particles of our Lord are all over our hands through no fault of the priest. The priest isn't deliberately trying to spread particles through no fault of the laity. The laity might not know that communion on the tongue is the norm of the church. It's the normative manner of receiving communion for the Roman Rite. Communion in the hand is supposed to be an indult, a rare thing, and we need to make sure that those stay like that. And if it was up to me, I would try to eradicate communion in the hand as much as possible, because again, when we look at the Eucharist as ordinary, then the Mass becomes ordinary, and the sacrifice of our Lord becomes ordinary. And then before you know it, there's no real reason to go to church. There's no real reason to believe in what our Lord did for you and for me. And I'm just very, very moved today to share that. And I think it was an absolutely beautiful thing. And I'm very honored that I could serve our Lord directly as a bit of an altar server today, something I haven't done in over a decade. Just very, very beautiful. So I hope you all have a very blessed Feast of the Assumption. Remember to get to Mass and to spend time with our Lord and with Our Lady today, as well as really enjoy the feast day. Maybe it's time for a nice meal or some time with family, or to go out and really just be together and really rejoice in the beauty of having not just a King of Heaven, but having a Queen of Heaven as well. All right, guys, until the next time, God bless you. Mary keep you. Adios.